Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm finally back from an amazing 10 days in Delaware with 20 or so family members. I spent time eating way too much Maryland blue crab, sitting out on the beach. We saw an Andy Frasco show, we did a ton of boogie and bodyboarding, and the one thing I didn't do this year was play boardwalk games and win stuffies. While I'm the king of Pop-A-Shot and the ring toss, and I have countless stuffies to prove it, I'm 50 years old now, and I'm declining with age. And really, I have nothing left to prove. I mean, my kid has seen me win just about every carnival game possible, and he doesn't need any more stuffies. So I'm retiring from my boardwalk domination. The one thing I'm not retiring from is complaining. And if you listen to this podcast, you know I use this intro to complain about the bullshit that is my life. And while this vacation was great, that changed my last day in the water. Here's where the complaining starts. I did something to my shoulder on that last day in the ocean. I didn't hear a pop, and I didn't notice any moment where I felt pain, but when I was getting out of the water, I felt a sharp pain anytime I would extend my arm with any weight in it. So if I was grabbing a soda and I put my arm straight out, it was immediate pain and I would have to drop the soda. I didn't know what was going on, and I still don't know what's going on. It also hurts when I pull things, which really sucks for me, because as you know, I crab a shit ton in Seattle, and we've got 3 more weeks of crab season left. But I'm afraid that if I try to pull a pot, I'll do more damage, and I really can't afford to be injured right now. So I could go to the doctor because I have good insurance right now, but I'm going to hold off on that and see if my body fixes itself. I've done something similar before with the same shoulder. See, a long time ago, when I was a total dumbass and I didn't have health insurance when I was living in Vail, I took an early season digger and I did something to my shoulder. I rode down the mountain in insane pain, and on all the dirt areas on the bottom where there was no snow, I'd have to ollie the dirt and just landing. I could feel the impact and the pain in my shoulder. Oh, it was miserable. I can feel it right now just thinking about that. So I get down the mountain, I head into the locker room at my work at Christie Sports to assess the damage of what was going on. I ran into coworker and Super Vail and Beaver Creek local guy Mike Sayers, and he was like, dude, your shoulder is dislocated. I used to play football at K-State. I've put people's shoulders back in before, and I will put your shoulder back in for you right now. So he grabs my shoulder and he wrenches on it a few times, and I went from being freezing cold to dripping sweat in a matter of seconds, and the agonizing pain turned into way worse agonizing pain. It was miserable, and it was only then that I realized that it wasn't a dislocated shoulder. It was a broken clavicle. Since I had no insurance, I dealt with the intense pain for a few weeks by taking a shit ton of a leave, and eventually I was able to get back to snowboarding. These days, I have a huge lump in my shoulder that reminds me of how important it is to have good health insurance. Where am I going with this? I'm not really sure. So I may as well get into the episode this week. And while I'm a complainer, my guest this week isn't one to look back and complain about anything. When I was at X Games a few months ago, I ran into legendary BMXer Rick Thorne. I went over and chatted him up for a few minutes for the X Games podcast that I was putting together, and I asked him if he would be interested in doing a full show with me, and sure enough, he was game. So I emailed Rick, I sent over a meeting request, and the whole deal was so easy. The day of the podcast is when things got interesting, and I got a peek into the craziness of Rick's life. Rick let me know that he doesn't have good phone service at his house, which is strange to me, because if I had a problem with phone service at my house, I'd get a new carrier, but that's me. Anyways, this meant that Rick was going to have to do the podcast out in the wild, and I had no idea where that would be. When Rick called me up and let me know his phone was at 6% and he needed to plug in at a Starbucks to do the podcast, I was like, all right, this is how this one's going to go. And it was kind of crazy to me, as I knew I was going to ask some questions that would be awkward to answer in a public space, but I didn't care. I was still going to ask them. Actually, I did care, so I suggested that we move the podcast to the next week when he could do it somewhere quiet, and he was like, no way, dude. It's going to be the exact same thing with me next week. Let's just get it done now. So that's how Rick lives his life, which is amazing because he's gotten so much shit done, which we talk about in the podcast. Anyways, we ended up recording at Starbucks, and Rick didn't filter himself at all in that public setting. While the sound isn't studio quality, I put a ton of time into the edit to make sure it sounded good, and I think you're really going to enjoy Rick's story. Before I get into it, I want to ask you what I always do. Please tell a friend about the show. Please share my social media posts. And please, please, please support my incredible sponsors who make this podcast happen. They are Liquid Force, Outdoor Research, Elon Skis, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Now, let's talk with Rick Thorne. This podcast is called The Powell Movement, and it's kind of a poop joke. And every once in a while, a funny poop-related story comes up in the podcast, and I heard that you have one. Can you tell the poo patty story?
Oh, you heard that I had one? Who told you this?
Well, I'm not supposed to reveal sources here. I just did my research. And you don't have to tell me the story, but can we talk about poo patty or should we not talk about it?
What's poo patty?
You must not remember the story. I don't know either. I was told that you might not answer this question, and it sounds like you might not.
Actually, I do have a poop story if you want to hear it.
Yeah, of course I do.
It's kind of gnarly, though. It's embarrassing. And before I get into it, anyone listening, don't judge me, but I had to do what I had to do.
Okay.
I was in Burbank, and I wanted to eat at this place called Chili John's. And it was during COVID. And I was hungry, and they were open. And I said, I'm going to Chili John's, bro. And I had their chili. Been around forever. Legendary spot. Well, if you know anything about California, there's nowhere to use the restroom. Okay? Nowhere.
Okay.
All right? It's hard to. But it's even harder when you're gridlocked on the 405 with nowhere to go. You hear where I'm going with this?
Yeah, so you're stuck in your car.
Yeah, I ate at Chili John's in Burbank. Decided to go home. Got on the 405, was gridlocked. Started to get that rumble in the tummy. I knew that if I got off the next few exits, I'm in the middle of the valley. No one's going to let me use the restroom. That's just how it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so what do you do?
And this is so embarrassing, dude, but I'm going to just say it. I looked in the back seat of my car, and I had a case of Monster, but only had like a few cases left, and the box was wrapped in plastic.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah.
It's not wrapped in plastic for the top of it, but the plastic was still attached to the box.
Yep.
So I didn't know what to do, bro. I'm telling you, I couldn't hold it, bro. I don't know if it's my age or what, but I sat on the box and just took a shit in my pants.
And you use that to be a barrier between the car and your ass, and that kept the car clean?
So it wouldn't stay in my seat. Dude, I didn't know what to do. So I had about a half-hour drive in hot gridlock traffic during COVID, sitting in my own poop, bro.
Oh, man. Well, that is absolutely gross. I'm sorry you had to do that.
It was like the walk of shame times 10, but nobody knew but me. And I felt like everybody knew that I was sitting in my own poop, dude.
Oh, man. Well, a lot of people are going to know now.
Don't judge me. Don't judge me. Listen, you make do with what you have, bro.
Yeah. And before we get too deep into things, I'm going to preface things with, we're going to miss a lot in this podcast because the show's only so long. We can only hit so many topics. And your life is like a mix of athlete, musician, and personality. So there's so many things. But at the end of the day, you've always looked at yourself as an artist. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So the poop stories, that one's a good one?
Yeah, man, that's good. We leave it in there. And we just keep going.
All right, okay. Just don't eat Chili John's or just find a restroom quickly. Listen, man, as an artist, because I started riding bikes because it was like, you know, maybe kids nowadays, they see like an opportunity of like success or a future or like, hey, what do you want to do when you get out of school? Oh, I want to be a pro basketball player. I want to be a football player. I want to be a pro skater. It wasn't like that back in the day. Like, I want to be a pro bike rider. It didn't exist. It did, but it didn't exist in the fashion of like, this is a career move. You know what I'm saying? Nowadays, little kids see it. They're conditioned to see it on TV, skate parks everywhere, sponsors embrace it. And so it's a way for people to say there's a formula to it now, right? So when I started riding, I rode from a different mindset. My mindset was to vent aggression and anger and to express myself. And it wasn't geared towards much of like even the contest. It was just about riding. And that's why I've always referred to myself as an artist, because I feel like I'm expressing myself every time I ride, where I ride, what I shoot. And it's not so much like, even though I love contests, it's not just about a contest podium placement. That isn't what BMX is to me. It's much more than that. And so that's why I look at it as an artist. But I don't shit on, like, I competed for 25 years, so I'm all about competition. I love it. But that's just part of what you do. It's just part of it. It's not all of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's ways to look at, you competed for 25 years, but if you look at like the contests that you're in and the people that you're up against, it's like the legends of legends between the Dennis McCoys, the Matt Hoffmans, so many different people that are in your era where to kind of crack the top 3 or the top 5 is almost impossible there. So it's almost like you have to look at it as an art and make it creative for yourself to make it fun, I would think, because if you're going for the win, it's not really going to happen with that kind of crew that you were competing against back then.
Yeah, well, I mean, things are just so much more formulated now because of with the Olympics, which I'm not against. Yeah, I think it's just another chapter into what we do. I think it's good to get it gets eyes on the BMX, which is great. I think that's a great thing. But I think that when we were growing up riding, or at least I was, like, there was just a lot more like individualism. I just hope that the sport hasn't lost its individualism of like who you are as a rider, what you are as a person. I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, what's the most important thing about you, what you're doing? I'm like, all of it. All of it's important. Your video part, it isn't like industry guys against contest guys. It's like, why divide yourself? Do it all. It's all part of what you do. Every waking up and how you tie your shoes is all part of what you do and how you are artistic and how you see things and do things. And that's what always attracted me to riding was that was my way to vent, like that was my voice. So to me, I'm just from a different time and generation to where hopefully some kids out there get into riding for those reasons too, rather than just contests. Because I think you'll have a longer career if it's something that you have this need to express yourself all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and just thinking about you and expressing yourself in art, I mean, it's something you can see all over your body, and you were kind of an early adopter to the tattoo. It was like before tattoos were mainstream, it was like military, prison, gang guys, and bikers had them. And then it was like people like yourself almost brought them to the mainstream through action sports. And did it almost feel like you with your art and being the person you were in front of the camera, that you almost helped normalize tattoos to the masses?
Well, what I think happened with tattooing and the masses was after action sports kind of had its like, oh my gosh, this run of like, oh my God, these guys, you know, with the media, because the media has its run with things, right? And, you know, for us, it was like hip hop, and then it was punk rock, and then, oh, what's this action sports guys doing? And then there was a Warped Tour and all this stuff, and the X Games, and then that started to die down. What's next? UFC. What's next? Tattoo shows. So I think a lot of the tattoo shows normalized it for society. But I think within BMX, speaking into the world that I was in, that I was doing in action sports, definitely within the BMX world, I was the first that was heavily tattooed that put it out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think with the masses, though, maybe I had some help with that because through the action sports world, people saw tattoos more and with me hosting. But I think between the action sports and then all the tattoo shows, that it became kind of like a regular thing. It was like, oh, now you're expressing yourself. You're not like an ex-con. But I still get mad looks, bro. People still judge me. I think it's funny.
Well, seriously, you were heavily tatted, and you were heavily tatted back then, but you waited a while for your head and neck, and now your head and neck are covered, and I can see people judging you and looking, and it's like you probably used to look scary to people because you're all tatted, but now you can visibly see them scared and crossing the street when they see them on your head and neck. Was there just like a line you crossed, and does life immediately change when you tattoo those parts?
Kind of. I mean, look, check it out. When I got my neck tattooed, it must have been in 1999. And I had started a show for ESPN called X Today. No, actually, I started that show in 98. Sorry. And it was called X Today, and I did it for 5 years. It was a 1-hour show. For anyone listening, I was one of the first guys to do any kind of action sports hosting and programming for programs and stuff. Anyways, for shows. And I heard that ESPN was owned by Disney. But I also heard that if you worked at Disney, you couldn't have a tattoo or it couldn't be visible. So my punk ass was like, if I get my neck tattooed, I'm going to be on TV on ESPN, but it's owned by Disney. Haha, I got you, bitch.
So it was more just a fuck you to the authority that kind of gave you your paycheck.
Kind of. I mean, but also, it's also something that I wanted to do, but I just got a kick out of it because I was like, well, technically I worked for Disney and I got my neck tattooed, so I didn't get fired.
But life changes when you do that, right? Like everyone, everywhere you go, especially in 1998, looks and judges you totally different. They're like, that guy's either a drug addict or he's straight out of prison or he's in a gang, because neck tattoos weren't what they are today, where a lot of people have them.
I mean, I've never been to prison. I've never done drugs. I just like tattoos, you know? But, I mean, I get it, though. Sometimes I see dudes that are heavily tattooed, and I'm like, damn, that dude looks crazy. And then I'm like, oh, wait, that looks like me. Oh, shit. I forget. like I literally forget, dude. I forget. I'm like, oh, okay. So, you know, the way I see myself is different than how other people will. So, hey, man, everybody's going to do what they're going to do. They're going to have their opinions. Who cares? But I think it's fun when people get so triggered. I think it's funny. I kind of get a kick out of it. I fuck around with it. I think it's great.
I mean, I think you should. I mean, it's part of you, so you might as well embrace it.
But most people see me and they see what my tattoos stand for and who I am, and they see the look of my eyes, and they know that I'm not a bad person. But at first glance, they're like, uh-oh. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like a scary look, especially if you can't see someone's eyes and you can't tell that they're not crazy. You just see a ton of tattoos. It's not everyday normal for a lot of people, and people are afraid of what's not normal a lot of times. So that's one thing. Do you have any tattoos that you regret?
No, I don't have any that I regret at all. I had 3 ex-wives. I covered them all up, so I'm good.
All right. That's how to divide everything by 3. But enough about regret and dividing by 3 and all of that. You're born in the summer of love. You grow up in Kansas City, Missouri, and your life's not the normal mom, dad, white picket fence, middle-class family that rooted for the Chiefs. What were things like for you and your sister?
Well, I mean, growing up was like my mom got divorced at a young age. You know, my parents broke up at a young age, and then my dad just never came back. So that was kind of like the 70s move of a horrible dad. They just bounced.
Right.
You know what I mean? The system tried to track them down. Things are a lot different now. They'll garnish your wages. They'll go after you for child support, all these things. Maybe my mom didn't pursue that as much, but, you know, a lot of us dads nowadays still reap some of those repercussions of those deadbeat 70 dads. Okay.
Sure.
And I had one of them. And I made sure that when I had my kids that I proved you all wrong. I raised my kids myself. I never left anyone behind. I'm heavily involved in their life. So I did the exact opposite. And I don't regret any of my past. I don't care. Like, it's life. It made me who I am today.
For sure.
But it was just kind of like, you know, you wake up and your dad's gone and you're like, well, that shit sucks. Like, you have a sense of like loneliness and abandonment. And then my mom worked in a factory and she worked at nights. So it just kind of felt like kind of lost. And then me and my sister had each other, but we moved a lot and went to different schools and shit and did all that. But it wasn't until I started riding bikes that I felt like I found something I loved. And I was about 10 years old.
So that's where you found your community, was through the bike world. That was your family.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say early on, it wasn't about because I'm trying to get in the Olympics. It wasn't because I was trying to get sponsored by Vans. It was because I needed something to grab a hold of to help me deal with my emotions and to have a voice and express myself, because I felt like I wasn't being heard. And so that's where the dominoes fell in place for me. Most people, they'll fall into drugs and alcohol and crime and all that kind of shit, right? Because they're trying to fill this void. It's what BMX did that for me. And that's why I'll never let it go, because it's been such part of me. And that's why I consider myself an artist as well, with the initial question that you asked me, referring to myself as an artist. But I don't regret any of it, dude. I'm not here to cry about parents or none of that shit. I'm so healed from all of those things. But growing up, like, did the best we could and riding bikes with my friends and just being out doing wheelies and jumping curbs and stuff. And that just was the best of times, and then things just kind of grew into what they grew into, and we grew with it, we build ramps and just started going for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I saw a 5th grade picture of you and you had long hair way before any of the good kids had long hair. Were you like a class clown, a troublemaker? Like, what kind of kid were you? Because if you don't have that much supervision, I would think you're acting out just for the attention when you're a kid.
Well, I mean, at times I went to like 2 different schools a year, moving back and forth with my grandmother, things like that. So it was always like trying to fit in, you know what I mean? And that feeling sucked. But with bike riding, it was like, I rode a lot by myself too. I mean, I built my first quarter pipe. I learned how to do airs by myself. I didn't have a scene. I wasn't part of a scene, you know what I mean? But like, I think when you move a lot and you don't have like both your parents, especially a son with his dad and guiding you, sometimes you want to like try to make friends and stuff, but I knew that I didn't fit in anyways.
It sounds like these days you don't want to complain about shit because it's how you grew up. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, I talk to a lot of different people, and when you're constantly moving around, going to different schools, having to make new friends, and you're always the outcast everywhere you go, that's kind of a tough childhood. And then you don't have like a positive male role model in your life. There might be guys coming in and out, who knows, but that just sucks for you when you grow up. And it sounds like BMX is the thing that you take out all your anger on. And back then, BMX starts out, it's all about racing. And that's kind of what existed in like 1981, 1982 when you get your first BMX bike. That was a sport kids could do if they didn't play team sports. But you don't come off as the guy who wants to be the fastest. We've talked about you being an artist a lot. Were you good at BMX, and how long did racing last for you?
I started actually freestyling before racing.
Okay.
Yeah, like jumping curbs, and I built a quarter pipe, and then I met a crew of dudes where I lived, and a lot of them raced. So I kind of just, hanging out with new friends, trying to make new friends, and through bike riding, it's like, well, I'll start racing. And I raced probably from maybe 13 to 15. I made it to 15 expert. the thing is that we would do tricks in the parking lot at the races.
Like that's where freestyle started, right? In the parking lots outside of the track?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it necessarily started there. I mean, you could start out like in the streets. We had dirt jumps. But when we went racing, in between our motos, there'd be a lot of time to kill, and we would just do tricks in between our races. And that's back in the time where freestyle was kind of pushed into like the shadow of racing. And for me, at least, I looked at it like, well, I'm not in the shadow of anybody. I want this to be its own thing, because I knew like the riders in California, Bob Harrow had started Harrow Bikes, and there were freestyle teams, dudes riding pipeline and stuff. And here we are like being like thrown with the racers. And I was like, no, dude, we're different. It's a completely different mindset. So for me, I looked at it like I leaned more towards freestyle because that gave me an artistic angle, rather than racing was just about like, if you're not first, then you're last. That just wasn't in my spirit of who I am. I more wanted to create a different thing for myself.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. While Peter Glenn has been the place to get all of your ski and snowboard needs for over 60 years, they do so much more than that. If you're an inline skater, they have the best products from K2 and Rollerblade. If you like to wakeboard, surf, skate, or whatever, Peter Glenn has you covered with the best gear from Liquid Force and others. And if you just need the most comfortable shoes on the planet, Peter Glenn has all of the best from Hoka and On. No matter what your summer or winter needs are, Peter Glenn has you covered. And if you can't shop in store, head on over to peterglennsports.com, where you'll find all the brands at the best prices, free shipping on orders of over $50, and you'll have the comfort of knowing that returns are hassle-free with Peter Glenn. So please support the show and buy your gear from the best, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Next up, it's Liquid Force, a brand that's been supplying premium wake gear since 1995, and it's not just wakeboards these days. Think the best park, boat, surf, and foil boards, built with state-of-the-art materials and technology to make your day on the water easier, better, and more fun than ever before. From wakeboards to shapers to vests to handles to foils to surfers, whether you're a seasoned pro or just dipping your toes in, Liquid Force has you covered with gear that's not just equipment, it's a lifestyle. And if you want to live that lifestyle, I have a one-time purchase code for you to use on the Liquid Force website. I'm going to save you 15% on your entire purchase. All you need to do is head on over to liquidforce.com, go shopping. After you pick out your brand new TC Skim Wake Surfer or whatever you buy, enter the code POWEL15, that's all capital letters and numbers, no spaces at checkout, and you'll get that deal. My final sponsor this round is Outdoor Research. I've loved OR for a long time because they make the best, most waterproof, warmest outerwear in the world, and that's because it's engineered and tested right here in the miserable conditions that the Pacific Northwest can deliver. And there are so many more reasons to be into the brand. While everyone knows they make the best lightweight hiking pants ever built, their new line of high-performance mountain biking apparel has been getting rave reviews from bike media, and when I recently chatted with OR's newly minted X Games gold medalist Tom Van Steenbergen and his brother Bass, they couldn't stop talking about how they've never had better gear. And that's what I think every time I get an OR package. Wow, they really thought about every detail to make this work better for me. To make your gear work better for you, head on over to outdoorresearch.com and check out the brand new Freewheel collection and everything else on the OR site. They cut no corners and they have the best in style and function on the planet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. The good thing about growing up in Kansas City is there really was a tight BMX community, and by the time you're 13, you connect with like a legendary crew that people still talk about today. Who and what was the BMX Brigade?
The BMX Brigade was run by Dennis McCoy, which is like the iconic, like DMC, the grandfather, or I don't even like to say grandfather, but the OG, triple OG of BMX freestyle, and I met him. Dude, check it out. I built a quarter pipe in my backyard, and I was trying some airs, and I actually learned how to do airs in like on a grass hill. It looked like a half pipe, but it was made of grass.
Okay.
Water would go through there when it rained, but it was dry. I learned how to do airs in that, which is crazy. Like, just learned how to turn a 180. And then I learned how to do it on a quarter pipe. So anyways, I went to the mall, and I'd already been riding, and we come out of the arcade, me and my sister, and there's this dude with this boombox and a bunch of dudes, and he's doing tricks, and he's getting money. So I was like, well, who are these guys? And that was the brigade. That was the BMX Brigade, because I was kind of new kid on the block. And I connected with those guys, started riding with those guys, and then I became best friends with Dennis. And then now let's fast forward from 13 to 15. He's 17. He becomes the number one pro in the world. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? It's just like those dominoes fell just right for me. It was a matter if I wanted to pursue it or not. But the brigade was iconic because, you know, a lot of these dudes do these ride outs with these bike lives and stuff, and they get thousands of people to go on bike rides. And I think it's great. But in my mind, we were doing that in the 80s with 40 or 50 BMXers, and we would get chased by the cops. They didn't hesitate. They didn't understand us back then. Nowadays, cops escort bike life to do their thing, which is great. But back in the day, in the 80s, they hit the lights quick and chased us, you know?
Yeah.
And so we were kind of like notorious for like getting in cop chases because we would like scram different, like disperse different ways and cross your fingers they weren't chasing you. But the only reason they chased us is because they were like, what are these? It was like a shock thing. Like, what are you guys doing out on the street? You're not supposed to do this.
And you guys would do it late at night, right?
I mean, we would ride late at night, but we would do all day rides, kind of like what Bike Life does a lot of their rides and their crews and stuff, which I'm not knocking their scene. I think it's cool they're out doing their thing. But in my mind, I'm like, damn, we did that at 12 years old and we would get chased, you know?
Yeah, but you're doing this 30, 40 years ago and you're kind of building a sport in different cities. There's crews of BMXers doing these kind of things, which is so cool to think about that 40 or 50 you guys are doing it and you're getting harassed and stuff by the cops. When you think about that kind of stuff over your career, between the stuff back in the 80s all the way through to early 2000s, when you guys are out in the streets and you guys get harassed by whether it be a cop, a security guard, whatever, most of us are going to be cool, right? Especially if we're older, we're going to have that conversation and try to get one more try, but we might not. And then you always have that friend, or not always, but a lot of times there's that friend who's just always been so fuck authority that they have to be an asshole to the person who's in charge and there's no chance of hitting it ever again. Do you have a good story about that friend or that person that was just a total dick that shouldn't have been?
Wait, you mean somebody that was like a total jerk and they shouldn't have been a jerk?
Like your buddies, when you're with like 10 bikers and everybody's trying to talk to the authority guy and be like, hey man, no, can we just do this one more time? You know, we're here just filming our part. And then you've got that one friend to be like, fucking just give us another chance, man. Why do you have to be such a fucking dick?
Well, yeah, so I mean, to a degree, I mean, honestly, like back in the day, we never asked. You know, we would just ride something. I tell my kids that, like, don't ask. Because I have this theory about life, is that most people will say no to you, especially if you're having fun. If you're having fun, 99% of people will want to shut it down and not embrace it because they're not having fun. So don't ask. If you're doing something, just go do it and then play stupid. So that's what we would always do. We would always be like, oh, we're not supposed to be here? You know what I mean? Because if I ask somebody for something, they're going to power trip and say no usually. But if you just do it and play dumb, you'll probably be able to pull it off. You know, that's how I roll.
Yeah, I roll like that too. And I was more thinking that when you do it that way and someone comes out mid-session and they're kind of pissed that you're out there, I feel like the older you get or the oldest people usually end up talking to the cops or talking to the security and being cool with them and leaving if you have to.
Oh, dude, back in the day, there was no talking with police or security guards. They were coming to bust you.
Yeah.
There was no like, hey, what are you doing? Like, especially the cops. I mean, we've gotten in helicopter chases. We've gotten chased by the cops on horses in New York. I could go on and on and on. It was just like bizarre. See, nowadays, I see dudes like ride their dirt bikes on the street, which is crazy to me because I know I'm riding my BMX on the street. But like if you go up by Melrose or Sunset, there's always this like pack of like 30 or some odd dudes on dirt bikes, you know, doing wheelies. And it's crazy because if we rode our dirt bikes on the street back in the day, you were done. It wouldn't have happened.
It's a totally different world. It's a lawless society. It's crazy how many people are doing burnouts and shit in the middle of the streets.
I just think in that area, I think it's just that area. I think other cities won't tolerate it.
No, we tolerate it here in Seattle too. It's crazy. I've been seeing it all summer of just wheelies everywhere. But I feel like everybody's police forces have gotten smaller and that allows everybody to do a little bit more. And a lot of that shit happens and no one cares about it. I'm going to get back to the BMX Brigade. Dennis McCoy's the leader. He's different than most athletes. He's like a really smart college kid. He was an engineering student with a 4.0 before he drops out to follow BMX and become like the #1 pro in the world. But he's like, you know, a friend of yours, but also like a mentor to you. How does he help you out in the early days?
That's crazy, man. You really did your homework because I remember sitting in Dennis's car going, listen, I got a scholarship to go to school and another scholarship. So I'm going to get paid to go to school to be a mechanical engineer. And he goes, but I have this opportunity to be a pro biker. I go, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going for BMX. He goes, because school will always be there. So I'm going to just try this out. And if it doesn't, I'll go back to school later, which was the smartest move he ever did because my son plays football, right? And I'll get to your question in 1 second. But I got to say this. My son plays football, and it seems like a lot of parents are in this quest to get their kid a scholarship and then their kid to be happy. Or will you be happy so you don't have to pay for it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what makes my kid happy with football is playing the fucking game, being on the field, making the plays, getting his routes, being in that moment. When that ball snaps, living for that moment. I can go to school right now at 55. Okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that a scholarship is happiness. Still got to work for it. If your kid goes to school for football for scholarship, he's got to work for football and the grades. He's working twice as hard. You understand? So these parents, I just feel like they think that a scholarship equals happiness, and it doesn't necessarily. To them, it does, right? It's a relief to the parent. But in my mind, to answer your question with Dennis, when he said, hey, I'm going to go ride, I knew right away I would have done the same thing because I feel the same way I do now when he told me that at 15. And so the way Dennis helped me a lot was, I could say mentor because he was older, but you see all these things happen to your best friend. He gets in the magazines, he wins a contest, he's #1 pro, he wins a truck, he's got a house, he gets married. You know, he has all these things. And I'm living in my mom's basement, riding my bike to work, working at the Olive Garden. But he opened my eyes to what's possible through him. You see?
Yeah.
Because if you can't see what's possible without someone else showing you, I was lucky enough to be around that. And then he introduced me to Matt Hoffman. And then we started the Sprocket Jockey shows and on down the line. So the way that Dennis helped me a lot was motivating me, always wanted to ride. It was always about riding. And he was always supportive of me, you know. He taught me like some things without teaching me, but just things happening to him and me witnessing things happening for him. And we were there for each other, building ramps, pushing each other, riding. So, you know, he helped me out a lot. Like, I don't think my career would have been the same without being around him because of his energy and his positivity. And I was already kind of into punk rock, like Sex Pistols and Ramones and stuff. But he introduced me to stuff like The Faction and 7 Seconds. And he had this whole other vinyl collection where I was like, whoa, that he probably still has because I know Dennis, he saves everything. And I was like, whoa. So even to the music stuff, the music side, and opened my eyes. And like, he's like one of the coolest dudes I'd ever met. So to me, it was like, oh, here's my best friend. Became my best friend. You know what I mean? You get it? And you're just watching. You're like, damn, I went that life. But instead of getting mad or jealous, like some people normally would maybe, I got inspired. I'm like, what's In-N-Out like? Oh, dude, you got to go sometime. It's so sick. And like, I remember the conversation. It sounds so crazy, but being so fascinated about him getting 5 patties at In-N-Out and eating it. And me going, dude, what is this place? I can't wait to go there. You know what I mean? It's inspired me.
That's amazing.
I owe a lot to Dennis. But a lot of things that he didn't even know he taught me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, he's like a true pro's pro. He's like the smartest guy in BMX, and he's got a really great head on his shoulders at 17 that tells him to forego college and follow his biking dreams, and he could have done anything that he wanted. He's an enigma. I guess the only other person like that I've really heard of is Craig Kelly, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he was also an engineering student. I think he might have graduated college. I'm not 100% sure, but then he went on to be the greatest snowboarder to ever live. Pretty much on par with DMC, but either way, here's where I get confused in my research. I read somewhere that at one point you get hurt and your mom got really, really pissed off that you got hurt and she takes away your bike and I think you're like around 15 years old. Is this true?
Yeah.
So what happened?
I'll tell you the story. We had a quarter pipe in my backyard. Quarter pipe riding was big, and then I saw in the magazines a half pipe, and no one had a half pipe. So I talked my parents into saying, hey, I have an 8-foot tall, 8-foot wide quarter pipe in the backyard. Can we build another quarter pipe in the front and connect and make a half pipe? And they said yes. So I was going to have an 8-foot tall, 8-foot wide half pipe.
Sick.
So they built it in the front yard in the driveway. And we were going to move it to the back the next day. And my parents said, don't ride it in the front. Well, sure enough, this is before helmets, bro. I did an alley-oop off the ramp straight to my face plant. My chin ripped off. My nose was mangled. Blood was squirting straight out. I was playing air guitar at France 1999. And Dennis freaked out and called the hospital. I was in convulsions. You know, one of the many, many injuries I've had. And so my parents tore down the ramp in the front yard, and they left the one in the backyard up. Before they had a chance to tear that one down, I would sneak in the back and ride it and begged them to let me keep riding if I wore a helmet. But that was a process. That took like 3-4 months for them. They didn't know I was going in the back sneaking it. They took my bike from me, the whole deal. And my theory was this. Yeah, I fell, I got hurt. But instead of taking it away, say you need to wear a helmet.
Yeah.
Because you guys knew that I loved to ride. Don't take away something somebody loved. I'm not shitting on my parents, but they were upset that I got hurt, which I get that. But if you find something you love, don't take it away. Find a way to make it work.
When you have everything taken away, because biking is everything to you at that point, is that when bad shit happens? Because I feel like I read somewhere.
Oh, yeah, no, I got in a lot of trouble. Yeah, no, I'll be real with you. I'll talk about it. I like about 15, and actually it lasted a lot longer than a few months. It was a while. Like that ramp in the backyard stayed there for a while. No one rode it. The one in the front was torn out. What I did is I rebelled and I started hanging out with like the bad crew. I did for like 3, 4, 5 months and got in a lot of trouble doing a lot of stupid things. Make a long story short, let's put it this way. If I didn't follow my parents' rules, I was going to get sent away. Let's put it that way.
I heard you say somewhere, or I read somewhere, like armed robbery and like really bad shit. What was the worst of what you did, if you don't mind sharing?
I never did any armed robberies. That's like an exaggeration.
Okay.
I didn't do that stuff. Honestly, it was just more hanging out with like the bad crew. You know what I mean? Just like dudes that were up to no good and stuff, and like just doing stupid stuff, man. And so that's when bike riding fell back into my life. Now I'm thinking about this. What I would do was I knew my life was like I had to listen to my mom, and I wasn't. But I was rebelling because I didn't have my bike. So I would go in the back and sneak and ride. And after I went through all this trouble, you know, with being in trouble and stuff, I think my parents saw that riding was a positive thing and then leaned towards letting me keep that ramp and start riding again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that phase of my life of just hanging out with these deadbeats was just like the test to show how much I really love something. You know what I mean? And by me being so mad, I didn't know how to vent my aggression. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're a little kid at that point, and you're all confused emotionally, and you got the best thing that you love doing taken away from you. I get it. When you graduate high school, you start at the University of Olive Garden, which we talked about, and there's not much of a future in sight for you. Dennis is a full-on pro, so you're able to kind of see what he's doing. He introduces you to Hoffman, and you've credited Hoffman with saving the sport when it needed it. And there are kind of a few different things that he did, but can you tell how Matt saved BMX?
Yeah, I mean, Matt saved BMX because it was at a time where like a lot of the bike companies, a lot of riders were tired of the cheap bikes that people were making. And at the time, riders started to make their own brands. This was a branch off. People were tired of being dressed up in the same uniforms to look like racers, to go compete at like these contests, and they looked like a spawn of racers. We really weren't fully expressing ourselves. You know, we were part of a team, and we wanted to be part of a team, but we looked like racers, you know, doing tricks. So when the industry started to say, hey, we're going to do our own thing, we're going to make our own bikes, a lot of things went away. The big contest series went away, which was the king of Vert. The bike companies, Matt started Hoffman Bikes, and Matt started to do Hoffman Bikes and then did the BS contest series, which meant bicycle stunt. And that's what kept the sport alive. Because back then, competitions were a really, really big deal. They still are, but they were a really big deal back then as well, because that's where everyone got together.
Yeah.
All the magazines, you know, people started to know about new riders at contests. There's a lot of things that contests brought to light. So what Matt did is he started the contest series and his bike company and said, hey, we're not going to let these corporations do it anymore. We're going to do it. And then that inspired other bike companies to rise up and do their thing as well. So Matt really kind of like kept it alive, and a lot of it was through the contest and through the Sprocket Jockey shows. Like the shows that we did was the best shows you could do in the world at the time. It was like Dave Mara, Matt Hoffman, Dennis McCoy, me, Steve Swope. We were like the root of keeping those shows alive on the road. We were the only half-pipe show out there doing it. So Matt also had his shows out there. So he was doing the shows, he was doing the contests, he was doing his bike company, and then he actually was the first to do a TV show with ESPN, and it was called Kids in the Way. And they did 6 episodes of that before I got my show on ESPN. So then he started doing the X Games and getting involved with ESPN. So he really did save the sport at that time in the early 90s because, you know, bike sales dropped, the contest series drops. What are we going to do? And that's when the riders took it in their own hands to make it happen. And Matt did that.
And that's not even bringing up the 900 that he did that blew minds in like 89 or the first rail that he does next year that changes street. But this is the time you're on Mongoose and you're doing Sprocket Jockey shows with Matt. And when Matt looks at you on the ramp in like St. Louis or wherever the hell you guys are, Indianapolis, and he's like, hey, ride for my new bike company. Was there any question in your mind about leaving Mongoose, or were you like, no, Matt, I'm 100% in?
Oh, no, because at the time, like, I was getting free bikes. Like, I did a tour with GT earlier that year. And then the Mongoose I got was through Dennis because Dennis rode for Mongoose, so he was able to get me a frame because he had a signature bike called the Hooligan. And I was like, yeah, I'll rep you, bro. Dude, I'd be stoked to have one of your bikes. You know, back then there was no gigs. The people that had deals, everybody's deals fall through. It was a really dark time for BMX. And so the people that had deals were people that were creating deals for themselves. See, Matt still went away with Haro, and then Matt's dad started a company called VIP in like 89, and it lasted like a year. And that's when everyone was trying to figure out what they were going to do because no one had sponsors. There's only a couple people in the sport making a living from sponsors at it. That's how far down it dips, you know?
Yeah.
So when Matt asked me, hey, do you want to ride for me? It's like, well, that was in 1990, and I'd already been riding with him for a few years and doing shows. I was like, yeah, like, absolutely. And I remember because we were at a show in Indianapolis, and the down tube on his bike had broken too. He goes, dude, something's wrong with my bike. I go, dude, your whole down tube is broken. And he rolled in and still did a tail whip. I was like, dude, this guy's nuts. But, everybody knew Matt's capability. Like, I met Matt in 87, so I'd known him 3-4 years. So for him to ask me, I was surprised and honored. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was like, but there was no hesitation. Like, oh, let me think about it. No, yeah, let's go. I had no obligation to anybody, and if I did, I wanted it to be with him.
And then even though you have Matt and maybe a couple other sponsors or people flowing you shit, it's like you're doing Olive Garden during the week, then you get a couple breaks to do state fairs, and you'll do that a couple times a year. And then when you think of the state fair days, are you doing like 5 40-minute shows a day, making a little bit of money, food and lodging, and you're just happy to be riding your bike?
Well, I mean, the Olive Garden was a way for me to make money to get to contests and to pay for bike parts and actually pay for injuries. Because I lived in my mom's basement. I didn't have a car. I rode my bike to work. Like, first car I got was for $100. I was 16. It lasted like a year. And then I didn't get a car again until I was about 23. So when I was doing that in the beginning, those first 4 or 5 years, I'd ride my bike to work. So I needed to make money to get to the contest. So I lived at home, so I didn't have to pay rent and utilities and all that, right? Yep. But all my money went to pursuing my dream. Like, when I graduated high school at 17, I got a brand new bike for graduation. My mom's like, do you want a car or a bike? And I was like, I'd rather have a bike. And so that's what I got.
And that shows where your headspace is, man.
Yeah, well, you had to work because I had to make money, but I wasn't like I made that much money. So when I'd go away and do shows, I figured it was a perfect job to build because they would let me leave. And then when I came back, I could create a schedule around my riding. It wasn't like a 9 to 5 where you're locked in here and you can't leave. You understand what I'm saying? I would be like, well, can I work these days and these nights? Because I knew that this riding was these days and these nights. You know what I mean? So they always worked around with me. But it was never going to be my career or anything.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Elan Skis. I've been skiing on Elan, the Ripstick and the Playmaker, for the past 3 seasons. And when I first started doing ads for Elan, I would rave about the quality of the skis because you really can see a difference in the fit and finish from an Elan compared to every other ski on the wall. I'd always attribute that to Elan having the best factory in skiing, their heritage in building spare no-expense yachts, and having real skiers build the skis in the Slovenian Alps. That combination has created lively, playful skis that remain rock solid underfoot at high speeds and have really made me feel like I'm a better skier. And while it's not ski season, when it is, if you demo skis before you buy them, please support me in what I do and try an Elan, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. If you buy skis without the test drive, trust me, and head on over to elanskis.com to see all the choices, and you're going to have more fun on the mountain than you ever have before next season. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. And while I love a cold beer, I don't always need the alcohol. And that's where Best Day comes into play. It's brewed with people like you and me in mind. The skiers, the snowboarders, the skaters, the bikers, the runners, the gym rats, the bladers, the surfers. Anyone who loves parking lot beers, tailgate beers, studio beers, workshop beers, you get the idea. Best Day is the best way to celebrate your best days and not to have to worry about the drive home or a lot of calories or anything else for that matter. While I'm not saying don't drink alcohol, there's a time and a place for everything. When it's doing time, I like to drink Best Day straight up. But when it's drinking time, I like to mix in a Best Day between every alcoholic drink to keep me sharp and in control. It's a cheat code for all night fun. To find out more about the Best Day flavors and buy some, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com or pick some up over on Amazon. My final sponsor is the brand that has created the most incredible pint glass in the history of the world. I'm talking about Stanley. Yes, that brand that makes your grandfather's favorite green coffee mug. It's also the brand that's front and center in the life and times of pop icon Olivia Rodrigo, and a brand that I'm proud to say has been supporting the outdoors and the sports we love since before the other copycat brands existed. Stanley invented the category of keeping things hot and cold in 1913, and while their quenchers have taken over the world by storm, I personally swear by their adventure stacking pint beer glasses, and have used them almost every day for the past 7 years. No joke. I also love all their choices of food jars and storage items for parking lot fare at the mountain or during my 1 day a year at Wild Waves, which is coming up. To see all the products from Stanley, the brand that everyone's talking about these days, but I've been talking about for over 7 years, head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. These are like the dirtbag touring days. So you have the state fair stuff. And then when you think about touring when you're younger and going different places and building the sport, especially in the early Hoffman days, did you do the whole, like, you guys being shoved in like a packed van, bruised and bleeding, rubbing up on each other, smelling like shit, then driving 6 hours to a different city, riding in that town, then most people go out and party that night, then you guys wake up the next morning and do it all again in another city? Did you do those like hard touring days that were really, really fun when you were younger?
Well, our tours were different. There wasn't like that. In the mid 80s to late 80s, a lot of bike sponsors would do that. They go to bike shows, they go to like bike shops, and they would drive to the next city and drive to the next city. I did a little run like that with GT and a little run with that with Haro, but the majority of shows that we did as sprocket jockeys were state fairs, meaning that like we were at this fair for a week.
Yep.
So it was like 4 shows a day, be there at this time, you know, that kind of thing. But it wasn't so much like when I did Warped Tour. Warped Tour was a different city every day, but it felt like the same city every day because it was another parking lot that looked the same, doing the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Like, so the way that we did shows back then was like Texas State Fair, 24 days straight, 4 shows a day. There's 96 shows right there you're doing. Boom. But the shows were not mediocre. They were always stepped up, always stepped up, always stepped up. So the shows that we did, they were different. But would it be like on a shoestring budget? Yeah. How much did you make a day? I made $100 a day, $15 a day food money. So that's $25 a show. The food money was barely enough to get by. Listen, man, I grinded all the way up until the X Games came. When X Games came and I was 27, is that what it was? No, I did my first X Games at 25. And then I was able to quit bussing tables. And that year, a little bit year before that, to just do straight shows with Matt, to just do shows only. Okay. And then once that X Games hit and the media got a hold of it, I knew, oh man, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I got to find a way to make this work. And that's when the sponsors started to come in. So you got to understand, like when I started riding around 10, it wasn't until I was about 27 that I actually really like felt like I made any kind of money at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like those first days you're doing all these state fair shows. And then if you were to fast forward even further from the first X Games, you're used to doing those state fair shows where you're making $400 a week or whatever you're making there. And then you fast forward to like 2000, it's in a post 900 world and the Boom Boom Huck Jam is happening. And that's like a totally different scale of shows than you've ever done, I would think, in your life. And just thinking back to like the shows you did with Matt at the state fairs and then the shows that you did with Tony Hawk all over the world, just the juxtaposition of how different they were. I mean, is it all 5-star hotels and private jets and the best of the best at that point?
I mean, with Tony Hawk, it was like a different level because there's a number of reasons, though. I mean, not just because it was Tony. You know, Tony always takes care of anybody that works with him. He's amazing to work with. But it's like the sports had built themselves up. So there was more money and interest in the sports. So therefore, you created more opportunities. I mean, back in the day, the energy was the same, whether it was like at a state fair or a bike shop show. I mean, the first shows I did with Tony Hawk was in 1992. I think that's what it was. Detroit State Fair. Joan Jett was playing on the stage next to the ramp. It was me, Matt, Dennis, and Tony. And a tornado came and ripped the stage off of Joan Jett's friggin' thing. We all had to bounce out.
Holy shit.
Those were the first shows I did with Tony. But I'll tell you when it really started to happen. Things started to change in 1996. Here's why. X Games came out in 95. Warped Tour came out in 95. Everyone's like, what is this stuff? Wow, it's getting some attention. It's getting some buzz. We knew it was long overdue. 96 came. Airwalk says, hey, we want to send you to Australia with Tony to do shows at the Big Day Out Tour. The Big Day Out Tour was a music festival. This is before I did Warped Tour, before I did any music festival. And it was called the Big Day Out Tour. It had Rage Against the Machine, Pornos for Pyros, Rancid. It was insane.
Sick, yeah.
30,000 kids with the vert ramp right next to Rage, stage with Rage. Prodigy played. It was insane. I was like, holy shit. So I've been doing these state fair shows forever next to like the pig races, people eating cotton candy, corn dogs and stuff, right? Whatever, you get it, state fairs. To now this. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's something in the air. Build on this, build on this. And it was that year that my whole life changed because then I met Kevin Lyman in Australia in 96 in January. He said I could do 2 weeks of the Warped Tour. And then the X Games came back around. And then that's when everything changed. Everything. Sponsors, everything changed. For me, it changed because I went from the state fair thing to like now I'm doing these music festivals. I'm on TV. Check it out though. Check it out. Within that next year, it must have been '97. MTV said, "Hey, will you host our event for us?" So I'm telling you, late '95, early '96 was a big change for a lot of us, not just me, for the whole sport, for all the sport.
But for you, you're on the mic a lot, which is a skill that you built with all the Sprocket Jockey shows and shows growing up. You're just a natural on the mic, and then you're able to develop that skill over time. And when these sports blow up, it's like you are the ideal person to put in front of the microphone because you can speak authentically about the sports, and you have the image that ESPN wants to portray of like alternative, edgy, this action sports thing that they're going to do. And so your career totally changes. But going back to that Warped Tour, for you, is that just a dream come true? Because like with Dennis introducing you to punk rock early on and you getting super into it and just music being a driving factor in your life because you're like this angry youth that I'm sure music plays the soundtrack to your life, and then going out and your favorite bands playing live and you're able to ride right there. How amazing was that for you?
I'm telling you right now, Warped Tour was an amazing opportunity. When I saw that tour first come out and I saw the bands, I was like, what? Like, this is insane. Like, how can I be part of this? I want to be part of this. And I did 15 years of that tour out of the 25 it was around.
Whoa.
So I grinded that tour quite a bit, you know, just riding it nonstop. And also, too, it led me to start a band. You know, I made a list of things when I was a kid of what I wanted to accomplish in life, my dreams. No one told me to. I just made a list. And a lot of the things I'm checking off, like comedy, being a comedian, starting a band, being in movies, being on TV. This is all my checklists. And so for that to happen was a way for me to be like, wow, this is insane. Because music always played a huge part in what we did. And it was such a motivating factor. See, that's where it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The Olympics are great. Let me just say this real quick. But it can't desensitize who we are. Don't let it desensitize you. Meaning that, like, you still have sponsors, you still have personality, so you don't have to execute your tricks like a gymnast compared to this gymnast. Don't let it get to that level, because then all of the personality is sucked out of it. And that's not what I'm about, because I know what these sports are about in a different fashion. Not because I'm older, but because those are the roots of why we do what we're doing. Now, I'm not saying that the Olympics are bad for that. I'm just saying that make sure that you don't let it drain out. And so for me, all of that stuff was just all part of like what we do, that expression. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's not all about contests, and you can't just try to please judges.
I mean, I think it's great. Listen, man, I'm going to clear something else on the flip side. I just want to say this. People claim they're professional because they do a video part, but I disagree. You're a professional, but at what level? Like, if you never compete and you put your shit on the line and you have to do it right now and you're judged, that's a whole nother kind of professionalism. Now, I'm not saying that you're not doing pro level tricks, and I'm not saying that what you're doing isn't good, because it's amazing. But in order to be a complete professional, you have to do it all. You have to do it all. You can't just do a video part and say you're a pro. I just don't agree with that, because you're not putting it on the line. You are for the part, but you're not in the moment. There's a skill to that, you know? There's a huge skill to that. So it's like saying you could throw the ball, and you could throw the ball as good as Patrick Mahomes. But if you never play a football game, are you considered a pro football player, or are you just a guy throwing a ball? I know football is different, but you got to put it in the element to say you're a pro.
Well, then you could say that if you rewind it a bit, you could say those street ball players fill that void of what you're saying outside of NBA players. But I mean, I think if you're putting together a video part and sponsors are willing to pay you enough to pay all of your bills, I look at it as a true professional, as a guy who has brands willing to support their lifestyle and biking. And if they don't compete and they don't put out a video part and all these brands still pay them, I look at them as a pro biker, because obviously their skill level is going to be at a certain level for a brand to want to pay them. And if you can pay your bills, technically you're a professional. Now, to the core biker.
See, but that goes back to just because you're making money. If you're making money, if you're saying if you make money, that means you're professional. That means you're just getting paid for a gig. That doesn't mean that you're challenging yourself as a professional should. That's just my opinion. I'm old school, though. I look at it like completely different. You know, so we're like, you're missing out if you're only doing one thing within these sports. You're missing out.
Well, you were one of those guys that did everything from flat land to street to vert, racing early on. I mean, everything that there was able to do in BMX, you were doing it, and your whole era, that was the way that you guys did things.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think there's some people out there that claim world champion but never competed. How are you a world champion if you never competed?
I agree with you there. Yeah, you can't be a world champion without competing.
That's a false claim. That doesn't mean that you're not doing the tricks, the ability, but if you're not putting it in the moment, you're not a world champion. No way. Doesn't make any sense. So let's just not have any kind of contest at all and just everybody claim what they want to be. I don't know. I think contests play a big part. I'm not trying to be contradicting about it, but I'm just saying with the Olympics, I think the Olympics are great. I don't even know why I went back there, but just don't let it drain the personality out of what we do. That's why I kind of like, the X Games in the beginning, they were a little clueless, but I feel like they don't drain people of that.
The X Games is the core riders Olympics, and the Olympics are for the masses. And yeah, it can dilute culture and stuff like that. I don't want to talk about the Olympics. I want to talk about other shit you're doing.
I'm sorry, dude. I didn't mean to take it there. My bad.
It's all good, man. You're the last person that's supposed to talk about Olympics. You're the guy with the tattooed head. There's not many tattooed heads at the Olympics, although I'm sure there are going to be a few.
Hey, man, if they call me, though, I'll go out there and represent. Let's go.
Damn straight you will. You love this country, I would think. But I don't know, and I don't really care about your political or country stance. We're not going to talk about that. Speaking of controversial stuff, let's say at the X Games, when you were the personality and the face of the sport, it seemed like back then, or the face of the games, you were talking to a lot of people when Hollywood was really interested in all things X Games, and it was like the biggest stars in the world were coming to the X Games. You're the roving guy, getting some of the bigger interviews. Have you ever asked someone a controversial question or something that's pissed somebody off during the interview?
No, I don't think so. I think I was always pretty light. I never wanted to piss anybody off, especially if I'm interviewing them. I never tried to push anybody's buttons or cause any trouble at all. I was always pretty respectful towards people. You know what I mean? Like, interviewed David Spade or Tom Green or Carrot Top, Weird Al Yankovic, on down the line. I even did a little thing with Eminem back in the day. He came to the 1999, I think it was 99, San Francisco X Games, when he's coming out and he's popular, And I did a quick interview with him about the motocross guys, but I've never tried to embarrass myself or other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just ask like a good question that I was going to just uncover a little nugget of interesting facts from someone. Sometimes that does piss people off. You're not someone to rock the boat in that respect.
No, when I interviewed a lot of those people, it was more kind of like, hey, what do you think of these sports? Do you do any of these sports? That kind of vibe more than it was because we were all kind of new to the media and they were there to get the coverage. You know how it works. Like you'll see people go to events because, it's publicity for them. But when I interviewed Vin Diesel, he had came to the X Games in, I think, Philadelphia 2000 because he wanted to see like how X culture, and he wanted to see the culture, doing what an actor does. And I interviewed him and then he liked me. And that was the whole reason why I got in Triple X.
Oh, yeah. So you're an actor, too. We haven't talked about acting. You went to acting school for like 3 years. And while we could talk about Triple X or we could talk about Paul Blart Mall Cop, we've got to talk about the most important movie that you've ever been a part of. I'm probably going to murder the name, but it was like Surf Nazi Holocaust Part 2. What was that thing all about?
Oh, yeah. It was the...
Punk Rock Holocaust 2.
Yeah. The guy that was friends with Warped Tour, and he was on the tour filming, and I think on that, I got my head cut off on that.
Yeah, I think you're on the cover of the video. The guy with the head cut off.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all part of it too. Like, I don't remember the storyline, but it was something about like the dude's head getting cut off all the time or something. But yeah, when you're on Warped Tour and everybody's hanging out, I was happened to be in the right place. But it was fun. Yeah, it was like a little indie film. It was fun. It was very cool.
Nice. And with Warped Tour, you weren't just a rider, like you said. You decided that you wanted to get into music, and like you do, you kind of go head first into everything and kind of make it happen. And you make a band happen. You start Good Guys in Black as your band. And is it right away that you're able to get into Warped Tour just because you're already a part of it and you know the right people?
Kind of. I mean, anytime an athlete first starts a band, you got a lot of opportunities. I played a lot of gigs. I did a lot of stuff early on. And I was able to do just a little bit of Warped Tour, which was cool. Kevin Lyman put me on. I did a couple of years of it, but it did help, absolutely, because it's an added bonus. I'm riding the ramp and I'm on the stage, so it adds to it, especially if that's what that tour is about. And you're doing both of those things, it kind of helped me a little bit. But that's not why I started it. Like, I was always into music, man, and singing and stuff. I felt like BMX has always been my physical way to express myself. And then music was a kind of more of an emotional way, a verbal way to express yourself. And bikes, you're expressing yourself through your ability, what tricks you can do, that kind of thing.
Something that I always talk about in the podcast is I usually bring up money and sponsors and stuff, but you've had like way too many sponsors for me to even start to go through. And you've done so much stuff that like you've had all these different TV shows and hosted so many different events, and there's been gigs and all different kinds of things. Does it get to the point where at one point in life you were like actually rich, like 90210 with a pool, nice cars and all that shit?
Bro, yeah. I mean, I had a house for quite a while. I worked my way up from my mom's basement all the way to Beverly Hills. Yeah. But that wasn't like I need to be here. It happened. And yeah, but my life took a big turn too, though, bro. Not to harp on any of the past of anything bad, but my life's been up and down.
Sure.
And I've been married 3 times, and then money started to dip. Why did the money dip? Because everyone got jealous. I'm on Cribs. I'm in Tony Hawk's video game. I'm touring the world. People started talking smack on me. I was doing these ads where I would use people's criticism and ads. And then the buzz came to where like I had too much. But my industry didn't understand that I made more money in TV and film and radio than I did from bike riding.
For sure. Bike riding's pennies, I would think.
Absolutely. Now we could sit here and say, well, you're an industry guy and you don't tour or compete. Well, you're only going to make so much. I'm a guy out there doing 500 shows a year, bro. Grinding these shows, going to these contests. So I'm making money in different ways.
You're getting more exposure than anyone.
I never drank. I never did drugs. I didn't go buy the fancy cars. I saved my money. I got a house. I got another house. I worked my way up. But here's what happened is so much bad press from me, a lot of sponsors pulled out. I got to the point where I couldn't make my house payment. Got to the point where my ex-wife was leaving because of that. Got to the point where I had to let everything go, file bankruptcy, move into a little apartment, and let my house go and start over. I moved into a 900 square foot apartment with 2 kids, 2 dogs, and a cat, barely getting by, and saying, okay, what's my next move? This is facts. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do anything that didn't make me be delusional. And I got a GoPro, and I went and rode and just started filming myself riding to feel good about myself again. This is facts. And I started my life over. Everything that I worked for went away at that time. Everything. I'm talking when I say everything, I mean everything. I made bad choices of trying to hold on to the house, going through my retirement money that I had saved, everything. I had to completely start over. I mean, there were points in my life where my ex-wife's like, you're going to have the kids again this weekend, and I had like 70 cents in my account.
Scary shit, man.
Yeah, and I had no credit card because I just filed bankruptcy and I hadn't built myself back up. So if I didn't have cash, I couldn't pay for it. Yeah. So I've raised my kids myself. I stayed single. I changed the way I view and see things, especially with women and relationships. I reprogrammed myself about my relationships with everybody and what I want in life and what I need to do for me and my family. And I had to start over. So I could sit here and say, yeah, I had a 6,000 square foot house in Orange County with a fish tank in the wall. It was badass. I wish I had that shit right now.
Yeah, it's nice to have, but it doesn't define you.
No, it doesn't. But at the same time, while I'm alive, I want things in life. I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. I want things in life. I want to get a house again. Why I'm here, why I'm alive.
I lost you.
I struggled, I did to get being a little kid from Missouri up to like...
Rick, I'm losing you here. I'm losing you.
I got some from TV and video, bought a house, and that got taken away. You see?
Yeah.
So for me, I've done a lot of these great things, but along the way now, as I've been building myself, I've been raising kids in California. That's not cheap. So a lot of my money's gone back into my children.
As it should.
But now that I've rebuilt my life back again, I know that bigger things are going to happen to me this time around. And it's just the life, man. Life's like a roller coaster, man.
And I saw you at X Games about a month ago. And in the 3 days there, from what I saw, it seemed like that being in that environment really re-energized you. Like you looked genuinely happy. Everybody was coming up and saying hello because in that world, like your name carries so much weight. And like leaving X Games, do you leave there totally motivated and wanting to start new projects?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty stoked with the amount of love that I got from X Games. But, I let a lot of my things go with negativity. And I've changed a lot too, I've changed as a person, and the energy that I project out is the energy I get back, So I was really stoked on the amount of love people gave me at the X Games. I thought it was great. Like, yeah, I would love to do more stuff with them for sure. But, I stay pretty optimistic about everything, man. Life is, like I said, man, it's been a wild ride, but it's been cool. It's been fun. So, the X Games was great to be back to see everybody, Hopefully I get to do more stuff.
Nice. Well, I will say that's going to be the body of our podcast. Now it's time for something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And I don't know why that sound happened, but this is where I get somebody that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week I was able to get another legendary BMX dude, a Paul Blart alumni, Mike Escamilla, to ask the questions. You two have a long history, and it was difficult for Mike to find some questions that you would be able to answer on the show. And I really don't have any filters or any things that I wouldn't put on here. So he could ask anything, but he said there are some things that you just won't answer. So are you ready for question number 1 from Rooftop?
Yeah, I'm already prepared. I already know these are going to be some off-the-wall ones. Let's do it.
Hey, Rick, can you give us some insight on how you tore your urethra, how you ended up with a piss bag attached to your leg, and if you can confirm or not confirm that it ended up spilling all over a girl you were dating's parents' mattress? Why, how, and what did you do?
So 1992, San Jose, you asked were we grimy, and yeah, we all drove up in an Astro van to do the VS contest, and during the contest my chain broke, and I racked myself real bad, and I went to the bathroom, and it's pissed blood, and I didn't know what was going on. And someone said, you need to go to the doctor. But I went back to the hotel, fell asleep, woke up. The whole bed was full of blood. Went to a urologist. Turns out I tore my urethra. And they had to give me a catheter. And I had to wear the thing for a month. It was horrible, dude. It was one of the worst things in my life. If you've ever had a catheter. And I had to wear it. So I started riding with this catheter. I taped it to my leg. It was wild. And so I was dating this girl at the time. And her friend had a party. And we were making out in her mom's bed. And there was a little spout at the end of my leg, like to drain the piss back. Almost kind of like if you're like, get lemonade out of like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she kicked the spout on accident. We were making out, and I felt the whole bed fill up with pee.
Oh, man, that's great. All right.
So I got the blow dryer out, was trying to dry it, and I hung up the sheet. I hold the sheet, and I was trying to blow dry it.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to jump into his second inappropriate question.
You're arguably one of the toughest dudes I've ever met. What injury to you was the worst? Was it smashing your face on a loading dock and having to get your face peeled back to fix it? Was it ripping your urethra? Was it collapsing lungs? Was it one of the other million broken bones and terrible things that happened to you? I'm just curious to you, which one was the worst?
Yeah, which one was the worst? Man, I don't know. Like I've had a lot of weird injuries. Unfortunately, like they aren't very common to most people. But I hit a loading dock once and I broke my palate. And then I had a hairline crack go across the top of my eye socket and broke my left eye socket. And that came down and it broke my palate. So if I was to put my thumb in my mouth and I could move my palate up and down. So what they had to do to line it back is they cut my face and lifted my face and put screws and plates in my cheekbones to attach my palate. And then they cut my eye, and I have screws and plates in my eye socket. I got double vision. I lost sense of taste and smell. They gave me a tracheotomy. My mouth was wired shut. I had one lung stitch across the top of my head. And that was about 3 months before the X Games.
And you competed in the X Games?
I still went and got 7th place. Everyone's like, are you going to go? I'm like, yeah, I worked all year to be in this. And I lay in bed, and I mentally visualize. I didn't want to miss out. And I just went for it. That one was gnarly because I was eating before I had surgery. I had to go home a few days because my face was really swelled up. I had all this fluid leaking from my brain. So what they did is they pulled my skin down. They cut my head from ear to ear and pulled my skin down and took fat from my stomach to stop the leak.
Oh, man.
And what was crazy about it was I lost all sense of taste and smell.
Forever?
And it was just the most depressing thing ever. No, but I could eat super hot shit now. It's crazy.
Yeah, man, that sounds awful all around. I'm going to go to his last inappropriate question. It's a little bit lighter than this one, I think. Let's go to it.
As we all know, the legends run deep with the BMX Brigade in the Midwest back in the 80s and early 90s. There was a rumor that you guys once rolled some giant something down a hill and through the window of a mobster's car dealership. Could this be true?
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about on that one.
All right, well, I'll have to ask something else then. Just let's think about teeth. When I think about injuries, one thing people don't talk about is teeth. Have you lost a ton of teeth doing what you do over time?
4 front teeth riding, but I wasn't doing any tricks. I was crossing the street, and this car was crossing the street. We didn't see each other, and I hit the car, flipped over, and knocked out my teeth. And then they tried to put them back in, but it wasn't going to work, so they just pulled them out. And that was before I actually even really started freestyling. And then I had a bridge put in, and then I did knock those out, and I broke those out. So, and then my baby teeth, I knocked out jump roping. I guess it wasn't just meant to have teeth. I don't fucking know.
And then in the grand scheme of things, thinking about concussions, all you old timers seem to have hit your heads a lot over the years. Is it something that you worry about? I mean, I know you can look at other people and say, wow, you can kind of see some effects, and you've seen what happened with Dave Mirra, and it's so unfortunate and so sad. Do you worry about shit like that? Or do you just live and say you'll deal with it when it comes?
I'm not worried about it at all. I mean, I've been knocked out probably over 30 times, man. I mean, I'm not worried about any of it. There's no reason to worry, but I think everybody's different. You know, people talk about CTE and stuff, and like I said, everybody's different. What's the point of worrying, right? Like, I've always looked at it like this, like, you know, any injury that I've had, I've always bounced back really fast. I don't take any pain medicine. I never get sick. And when I say that, I never even got COVID. I don't even get headaches. I have about 80 to 85% of my flexibility. My mind is so incredibly strong and positive in its own way that I don't let injuries bother me. I just kind of walk them off, shrug them off. Because if I sit around and talk about it, then I'm still manifesting it, right? I like telling the old stories, don't get me wrong. But I meet people that are like, I used to ride bikes where I broke my leg. I'm like, and? You didn't love it enough then to stick with it. You know, it's just a bone. It'll heal.
Yeah.
I'm just being real. It heals back stronger anyways. But that's the mindset I have to be at 55 and still be riding, or almost 55.
Well, you need to be that way when you're as old as you are. You're only 5 years older than me, but I know that's getting old for where you put your body and put yourself at risk. And that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's the podcast. And your story is so cool because while it may have looked like an overnight success to a lot of people who met you when the X Games started, you were a server at Olive Garden for like 8 years, and the only thing worse than that would be a dishwasher at the Olive Garden.
Well, no, I wasn't a server. I was a busboy. I cleaned the tables.
Oh, so you did have the worst job that you could possibly have at Olive Garden, other than the dishwasher, I would think. But thanks to your impeccable timing and your willingness to bleed on the streets and ramps for years for pennies, then it all explodes for you. You rode the wave of extreme sports, that's what it was called back then, in its heyday, and you served as the cool face of action sports. Thank you for that, and thank you for your time.
Hey, that was an amazing interview, dude. You did a lot of your homework. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, man.
So that was time with Rick Thorne. And when I recorded Inappropriate Questions with Mike Escamilla, he was like, good luck. And I didn't know what to expect with that. It wasn't like a good luck, like, oh, have good luck, have a great interview. It was like, oh, you're interviewing Rick Thorne, good luck. And really, like I said, I didn't know what to expect. But my takeaway now is that Mike knew that Rick would be all over the place. And while for some people that's not a good thing, for Rick, that energy is what makes him do so many things. I mean, at the end of the day, Rick has done so much, from server to athlete to TV personality to touring musician to actor. It's like the dude has had 9 lives, and it's going to be interesting to see what that 10th one turns into. And I should say that I didn't know Rick during the prime X Games days, so I don't know what kind of dude he was back in the day. But listening to him talk, it sounds like he's a changed man today. And I'm guessing that all has to do with ego, but who knows? I should have asked him about it. At the end of the day, while Rick may live his life differently and a lot more all over the place than most, there's no denying that the dude produces time and time again, and he's one of those people that you should never count out. And he's an absolute legend in the world of BMX. That's the podcast. I want to thank you again for listening, ask you to please review me wherever you listen, as it really does help the show grow, and it really makes me feel good about myself. And these days, I need that more than ever. So thank you for doing that. And finally, I want to ask you to please support my incredible sponsors who make this show happen. They are Liquid Force, Outdoor Research, Elon Skis, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Have a great week, everyone.